Hello, all social media family, biological family, extended family, family of my heart, and all out and abouters, and Jeanette speakers, and YouTubers, and anyone who's going to be under the sound of my voice when I post this review. So, this is my movie review for the Bobby DeBarge story that aired on TV1 over the weekend. It premiered at 8 p.m., I believe, on Saturday night. I didn't get to see the original premiere. What I got to see, I went ahead and watched one of the later showings and everything. To give you a little bit of background for those of you who may be newbies to the oldies R&B thing, Bobby DeBarge was the second oldest child of Robert Louis DeBarge Sr., who was of French descent, and Ederline Abney, who later became DeBarge. They were married 21 years up until 1974 when they divorced. She was probably 18 when they got married, and I think he was about 21. Bobby was also from Detroit, Michigan. He was one of 10 children, and a member of the R&B group. In fact, he goes down as one of their most famous lead singers, the R&B group Switch, that was around in the late 70s and early 80s. He and the second oldest son, the oldest child out of their family, was their sister Bunny. And so he was the second oldest, and his brother Tommy was right behind him. They were both members of this group. The group Switch was managed by Jermaine Jackson and his wife at the time, Hazel, who also is Berry Gordy of Motown's daughter. And yet you read that right, Jermaine Jackson from the famous Jackson family. Their two biggest hits were "There'll Never Be" and "I Call Your Name." Out of the two, I like both of them about the same, but I'm kind of 60-40 in favor of I Call Your Name. "I Call Your Name" is the one, if you listen to any oldies R&B music, he's the high-pitched voice saying, "I'm a man now, baby, a grown man." And, all of that. There was a few jokes when it was first out because he's kind of known. One of the trademarks with the DeBarge male singers is having a very high pitched voice, and very high pitched. I mean, very very gifted in singing, but just singing in falsetto. Singing in falsetto. If you listen to those two songs and his voice sound like, oh gosh, he sounds like, he is the older brother of the siblings that later became the group DeBarge. So he and his brother Tommy DeBarge went ahead of the other siblings, and the record label found out that they had siblings and everybody in the family was musically gifted, and so they decided to make room for his brothers and sisters. Now the siblings that would originate the group DeBarge are Bunny, Randy, Mark, L, who is one of who probably is the most famous one out of that particular set of siblings. There were comparisons made between L and Michael Jackson. There were comparisons made between the DeBarge. In fact, most famous family acts were compared to the Jacksons for that reason. The entire family had, vocal chops, musically astute, very, very musical family. They They formed DeBarge, which would later include. I'm trying to remember. No, they're actually Motown made room for their brother Chico, who was the baby, to come forward and have a solo career. So he was never actually officially a member of the group. Now, Bobby, the one who was the subject of the film, later joined them once two of the members, Bunny and Elle, departed to try their hand at solo work and everything. If you hear any of Switch's stuff and you hear, the falsetto and you're like, oh, is that Elle? They're like, no, that's not Elle. That's actually his older brother, Bobby. So Bobby is the oldest boy out of this singing family. So, Bobby had a lot of struggles with drugs and issues with physical and sexual abuse from his father. If you watched, there were two unsungs that kind of focused on that. One was the unsung on the group Switch, which was who he was actually a member of, and pretty much started his career with. I think he was a member of another group behind Barry White. But he's mostly known for Switch. And there was another one, I believe, that was on the DeBarge family. The group DeBarge, which is the family's last name. So many of the members of the family alleged that their father was extremely cruel, very physically, sexually, emotionally. He basically abused his kids every way that he possibly could. And I believe many of the members had a lot of issues with drug abuse. And I believe that it probably stemmed from all of the stuff that their dad did to them when they were younger. They're all kind of known for being light complected, which is the result of a interracial marriage. Their mother was black and their father was white. In 1988, he had a conviction. Bobby, the subject of the film, had a conviction for drug trafficking and served 6 years. In his whole career, he released one solo album called "It's Not Over" in 1996, and that came out after his death in 1995 from complications from age. He was 38 when he passed. So he went on to become a mentor for his family, and as I mentioned before, he would later join once Elle and Bunny went off to have solo careers. The details about his addiction, his problems with drugs started when he was 15 years old. Heroin was the first drug that he ever tried, from what I could see in my research, and he seemed to never ever get from up under drug addiction. So that's one of the reasons why it is so important to, not start, because everyone thinks that they can kick. Everyone thinks that, well, I'll just try it just this once and, you're hooked. Later, he evolved into using crack and cocaine, which, if you know anything about drugs, they're basically the same drugs. I think crack is more addictive and cheaper to get. So my thoughts about the film. I will start off by saying I'm a member of the Fans of the Show Unsung group, so I kept seeing comments about, the horrible wigs in the film. So when I finally got to see the films, the wigs were pretty distracting. I think, they kind of took away from the quality of the acting. The quality of the acting was not terrible, But I think that the actors themselves, because I recognize the mother, the actress playing the mother from other films that she's done, and the past, if it's the same lady, I think it is. So the acting was, kind of on point. I didn't really care to, at first I thought, maybe, I'm like, well, maybe it's just me, but it seems like the actor playing Bobby was more convincing as Bobby when he didn't have on that wig. When he, in the scenes where in Bobby's later years where he's in prison, and when he's ready to pass and everything, and he doesn't have on the wig and he just has his hair short, he seems a little more convincing. I really felt like the actor really kind of overacted his parts. And later on, I saw a posting from Eddie Fluellen, who was a member of Switch during the time that a part of the original lineup and a part of Switch, and was a contemporary, a group member with Bobby DeBarge. It kind of was saying the same thing. There really was, he didn't feel like there was no truth. And anymore with biopics, I love the parts that I love about biopics is I get to hear, feeds my love for nostalgia. I get to hear some old music that I really liked back in the day if it was somebody I really liked a lot. But at the same time, the problem with biopics is, I always have to wonder how much of this is actual events and how much are the directors and different people responsible for making the film kind of, putting their own little spin on the events. So the film itself involved a lot of flashbacks, so it seemed to jump around a lot. I would have liked for some of it to be a little more biographical. I think the flashbacks didn't really help. The reason for the flashbacks was because, like I said, a lot of their drug issues seem to stem from the fact that they were very horribly abused by their father, their biological father, and mother's husband. And some of the stuff with the abuse, they kind of got accurate. Believe it or not, it is not uncommon in families where there is abuse for the older children to bear the brunt of the abuse. And it is not uncommon with abusive fathers who have a real distorted view of what manhood is to really take it out on their oldest sons. So, and also one thing they got right is the tendency for children who are abused by their parents to go forward and bully or abuse their younger siblings. Because one of the things that they mentioned was the one brother, James, and by now it's all out because you guys have seen one of the one hip hop show that's on WeTV, Growing Up Hip Hop. Thank you, Holy Spirit. Where the father, Christina DeBarge's father, James DeBarge, was at one point in the, I would say about mid-'80s, was married to singer Janet Jackson for a very brief amount of time. So they kind of kind of touched on that, how they met and everything, because Bobby at one point, I think, had dated LaToya or was interested in her, which can be a little blurry. But James, who was an ex of Janet Jackson's, mentioned how Bobby bullied and abused him. So they kind of got that accurate because, if you want to read up, on the effects of all types of abuse, many times it can spiral into the older children bullying their younger brothers and sisters, and I have witnessed it myself the tendency for it to trickle down. And, and maybe trickle is not a good use of words because it's a kind of a minimizer, but it's the best one that I can come up with. So, a lot of that was mentioned as well. I personally, unlike the New Edition biopic and the Bobby Brown biopic and even Whitney Houston's biopic, this is not a biopic that I believe that I would probably watch numerous times or whatever. I think one time was good enough for me. If you choose to watch it, I'm going to say, like I said with the movie Ma, watch at your own risk. A better source, if you decide you want more information about the DeBarge family and their struggles with their upbringing, because they actually are, on top of being very musically talented. And if you want, you can, Google them in the Spotify app. I highly recommend Spotify myself because I really like it as a source for music, because you can pretty much find just about anybody's music. 3 of the members have books out. Their mother, Ederline, had a book out. It's on Amazon. I think it's The Other Side of Pain is the title. When I post this, I will be posting this on my Out and About blog. And so when I post this, I will post links in my YouTube channel, and I will also post where you can find it. Bunny also has a book out called The Kept Ones, Volume 1. And I believe that might be interesting. One of the group members of Switch also wrote a book about their experiences as a group and everything. And one of the other brothers wrote a book. Tommy, I believe, wrote a book as well, which they have his advertised at such an astronomical price. I'm like, no. Who is going to pay that for that book? But there are also interesting sources. I personally think, every time I looked, as I watched this movie, I almost felt like my brain kept saying, I wonder, like, do-over. Because to me, there are so many places they could have went with this as far as telling his story. I don't believe it really did a lot of, to me, it would have been better almost as a bit of a documentary style. I enjoyed the unsungs that gave, information on them a little bit better than I enjoyed this movie. And actually, to be perfectly honest with you, he could have possibly been a third unsung. Because, everyone around them, kind of touted him as almost a L before L because of his musical giftings, his creativity, and all of his, multi-talentedness. So I really don't think that this movie did. I think there was so much more that they could have done with this. And as far as the casting goes, they could have probably even did a little bit better with the casting and everything. Though, like I said, one of the criticisms kept being the wigs, which I don't know what the movie budget was like, but that's, another thing. Getting a character to be, at the acting challenge of being able to capture and be believable playing an actual person, especially if people already know what the person looks like, can be a bit of a challenge as well. So, anyway, out of my movie ratings, since this was already on TV, I'm not going to say TV or first run. This is actually a biopic that I'm glad that they kept it at TV and didn't try to marketed for cinema because I don't know that it would have done that well. So I will say it wasn't a many people have called it terrible. It wasn't a terrible movie. I think much of it kept my interest simply because of the subject, which was Bobby DeBarge. Um, Also, like I said, um, also, because it had an interesting backstory, which was the story of how the father treated um, the children. And unfortunately, he's not really alive. He's not alive anymore to, um, ask about. And I think when they had did the unsung, they had tried to get him to come and tell his side of the story, and he refused to talk. And he has been passed away. From what I've seen, he's been gone since 2009. So the unsungs that I saw had a little bit of age on them. But at the time, he was alive when they did their unsung, and he refused to comment. He refused to do any interviews. He just wouldn't talk to anybody. But it's still an interesting. He still, Switch still has it. I've listened to them and everything. Um, like I said, I don't think this movie did. Sorry TV1, but I don't think that this movie did the memory of Bobby DeBarge or any of the remaining DeBarge members a whole lot of justice. I felt like there could have been better casting. I definitely felt like it could have been a little more biographical, and if they wanted to include some flashbacks, cool, or they could have, and they could have had, they could have done a better job of capturing Bobby DeBarge, which if you Google Bobby, he's a very good looking young man, but also very tortured and struggling with a lot of demons, which also affected him in all kinds of areas, and not just in the drug use, but the drug use was the most prominent, what they call the most prominent and presenting evidence of an attempt to drown a whole lot of demons that he was struggling with and struggled with pretty much for the rest of his life. He also has two children. When I looked up his music on Spotify, Bobby DeBarge, the third, also has some music out. So if you're, just feeling like listening to some